Hi, and welcome to the Art of Film Funding. I'm your co-host, Claire Papin, along with writer-producer Carol Dean, author of the best-selling book, The Art of Film Funding, and host of this show. Carol is the president of From the Heart Productions, a nonprofit organization that has supported filmmakers with the Roy W. Dean Grant, fiscal sponsorship, education, and resources for over 30 years. Carol also teaches the Learn Producing class. Each class features an industry expert guest instructor and is designed to give the information, guidance, and support to become a successful producer. You can learn more about this class and all of From the Heart Productions offerings at FromTheHeartProductions.com.
I'm Carol Dean, president of From the Heart. Join us and learn how filmmakers are using comic books to fund their films.
We have two special guests today. Tony Panaccio. He's a 36-year-old media veteran, having started his career in the 1980s as a newspaper journalist for the Clearwater Sun, the Tampa Tribune, and others. In 1989, Tony won the Florida Press Club Award for his eyewitness coverage of the execution of serial killer Ted Bundy, which is also where he met future agency colleague John Wilson. He later shifted his career into public relations, video game producer Capstone, with that producer, where he also scripted many of their games, including William Shatner's TekWar. During that period, he was also Shatner's publicist for his various video game projects. Today, Tony is the CEO of Victory Comics, a startup in the contract publishing space. Victory's COO, Jan Utstein, is internationally award-winning producer and editor-in-chief of Hurricane Entertainment. She's produced numerous comic books and graphic novels through Image Comics, IDW Publishing, and CrossGen Entertainment, boasting over $2.3 million in sales worldwide. Jan was editor-in-chief of all of Hurricane's titles, including Violent Messiahs, which earned nominations for every major award in the comics. She spent 8 years at Marvel Studios Groot. Her other studio credits include Warner Brothers' Demolition Man, Columbia Pictures' Green Hornet, and DreamWorks Studios' Cowboys and Aliens, as well as Steven Spielberg's Lincoln. And Carol, Tony, and Jan have a lot to teach us about turning your screenplay into a comic book.
That's true, Claire. This is all new and exciting ways for writers to expand. So thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Oh, we're happy to be here.
Yes, we're going to have a lot of fun and learn a lot. So let's get started and cover story adaptation and creative process. Now, from screenplay to panels, Jan, what do you think are the biggest differences between writing a screenplay and writing a comic book script? And how does that storytelling change when you go from film to comics?
There's well, the main difference first and foremost is the actual script itself. When you write a script for film, you're writing moments, you're writing the dialogue and so forth. When you're writing for comics, you're actually writing a page at a time and you're breaking it down into panel by panel. So just the formatting of the scripts themselves is very different. They're unlike the film industry where there's a specific format that people use. In the comic book industry, there are formats that are preferred by people, but there's no actual you need to use this. It's differs a little bit from writer to writer. The biggest difference to know, though, in the actual writing is that when you're writing for comics, you have to write key moments. When you're writing for a script, you are writing entire visuals. So, somebody, what I like using as an example is Joe gets out of bed, he walks to the sink, he looks down, he turns the water on. All of these things will be happening in a screenplay, but in the comics, you'll have a panel with him waking up, and then the next panel, he is standing at the sink. There's no him walking from one to the other. So it really is picking those key moments that tell the story without going into all of the specifics.
And it has to be a very small amount of dialogue, right?
Well, it depends on the writer. Tony can back me up on this. There are writers who are incredibly verbose, and then there are ones that just write, as little dialogue as possible. When the artist is drawing the page, they know what the dialogue is going to be. So if they're doing their job right, they will leave room for the word balloons. So you actually could have a lot of dialogue. You just try not to. The amount of dialogue will also depict your timing. So if you want people to spend more time on a panel, you can write more dialogue. And then as they move to the next panel, there might be just one word. And that's because you want them to get through quickly. So it really is not just about what's being said. It's again about timing.
Okay. Well, because screenplays rely on descriptions for cinematographers, but comics require the writer to think in panels and turn pages. So, how do you translate a film scene into an engaging comic book sequence?
Yeah, so the thing that you don't see when you're reading a comic is that when the script is created, there is a large, sometimes small paragraph describing exactly what is in the panel. And instead of seeing that in movement, like you would in a screenplay, you are seeing that as depicted by the artist. Now, there are different ways of working, but my favorite way is for the writer to sit with the artist and do thumbnails of each and every panel. This way, the writer is sure that whatever he's trying or she is trying to say is said visually, and the artist is not sort of working in the dark. They know that they're giving the writer what the writer not only wants but needs, because as pointed out, there's not a lot of information. A lot can be said, though, if the artist is good. A lot can be said by how their eyes are, or the movement of a hand, or not movement, I'm sorry, gesture of a hand. So a lot of things that would be done in movement in a screenplay, it's going to be done in a still frame. Think of it as storyboards. That's the
Yes,
best way to do it.
yes,
Yeah.
storyboards, absolutely. Yes, I was watching the Kurosawa life story told by his daughter, a documentary about him, and his art is exemplary. He was such a good artist, and there was, and you could go from one of his storyboards right to the actual film,
Yeah.
copies of film, and there it was. It was alive in the film. So,
Yeah.
Many years I worked with Stan Lee, and I was at the launch of the Spider-Man ride at Universal with Stan. And the first ride had Stan in the front row, and sitting next to him was Steven Spielberg. So after the ride, I cornered Spielberg and got about 20 minutes of him on tape, and all he talked about was the incredible debt that filmmakers owe to comic book creators because, in Spielberg's words, they taught us how to tell stories.
Mm.
wow, how brilliant. Of course they did. If you can tell a story with a few pictures and minimum words, you're a good storyteller.
Yeah. They said that Hitchcock would storyboard his films to a degree that when it actually came time to shoot it, he was kind of bored because all of the excitement went on the storyboard pages.
Exactly, exactly. That's exactly right. Um, all right, so it's dialogue and narrative flow. That's the thing, Jan. So comic
Yeah.
book dialogue is limited compared to film. So how do you adapt a screenplay's dialogue to fit the comic book and keep it natural? This is up to the writer to just take a whole scene and put it into a few words.
Well, again, it's that collaborative effort, and it's why I really, whenever I'm giving any kind of advice, doing any kind of consultation, one of the things that I stress is don't just take the script and hand it to your artist. Have your artist and your writer, as much as possible, in the same room, sitting at a table, preferably a drafting table, so that it's nice and angled up, where as the artist does those thumbnails, the writer can give their input into why it either is or isn't working. And it's just so important. If you think of the writer and the artist as sort of the directors of the comic, because there really is no person that could be labeled the director, and the editor as well. As an editor, I usually allow my artist and my writer time alone to do that, because it's such a creative collaboration that I really feel that it needs to be a natural flow between the two of them in order to get the best possible story that you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, should producers turn their scripts into a one-shot or a limited series or an ongoing comic? Which factors should they consider when they just are making a decision on the best format?
Yeah, so there's a lot of possibilities, but I like taking a screenplay, taking the first act, turning that into issue 1, taking the second act and turning that into issues 2 and 3, and then act 3 and whatever might come after, depending on the screenplay, is issue number 4. And I find that the pacing on the comic is best when it's adapted in that way. So I'm very much for 4 issue. Now, 4 issue meaning 22 to 24 pages of art and story per issue. However, you can do that as a graphic novel, so that it's done all in one. A lot depends on finances. A lot depends on whether or not you're taking that screenplay, turning it into a comic for the purpose of pitching versus turning it into a comic for the purpose of selling on the open market. So it really, you have to ask yourself first and foremost, what do I want to do with this comic? Where is it going? Is it going to be used as a marketing tool, which is Tony's department, or is it going to be something that we're going to try and sell? Most screenwriters, what they'll end up doing is taking their first act and doing that first comic so that they have something to whet the appetite of producers. Now, if you're a producer and you have the funds, I recommend doing, and the time, I recommend doing a small graphic novel and putting it all in one story.
And keeping in mind, let's go back to the 1970s. George Lucas kind of pioneered the idea of using the comic book format to introduce new intellectual property to the marketplace. Before Star Wars came out, except for the people who saw the trailer, nobody knew what it was, nor did they care. So Lucas approached an editor at Marvel Comics named Roy Thomas and did a deal. And they put out 2 tabloid-sized editions of a Star Wars comic that was literally the script translated into comic book form. So the entire story of the movie of Star Wars was released in comic book form a month before the film hit the theaters. So this was distributed through your typical comic book venues at the time in the 1970s were convenience stores, pharmacies, where you had the spinner racks. So by the time the film came out, millions of people had experienced what Star Wars was, and they went to see the film, even though they knew the story. There was no internet back then, so there was no sense of, oh, there's spoilers in here. They wanted to seed the marketplace and say, this is some interesting IP. Take a look at this. And by making people aware of the IP and the film, there were lines around the block when Star Wars opened. And you combine that with the trailers and the other marketing, and it created a massive impact on the marketplace. So if you're a filmmaker and you have something, it doesn't matter the genre. It doesn't have to be science fiction or superheroes. It could be any genre. If you want to introduce that IP, you can introduce it through a graphic novel. There are many, many films that were originated as graphic novels that people don't realize. Films like The Road to Perdition, Viggo Mortensen's The History of Violence, Johnny Depp's From Hell. All of these were graphic novels before they were films, and they became films because the marketplace liked the IP and wanted to see it translated into film.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much, Tony. Well, what about you were talking about pitching using this comic book technique to pitch a film. I've never heard of that. Can you expand
Yeah.
on it?
Yeah. So, if you're a screenwriter, especially if you're a screenwriter who doesn't quite have representation yet, you can't just send your script to people.
Right.
You can't do that. Legally, they can't take it. However, if you've created a comic book and the comic book has been sold anywhere, comic book stores, sold online, it is considered a copyrighted story. And because it's already out there, production companies will take it faster than they would ever take just a screenplay. As a comic book publisher, it's a lot easier for me to call a producer, to call a company and say, I have a new comic book. I would love to send it to you, or I would love to pitch it to you. Now, whenever possible, I pitch in person. Sometimes you don't get that ability, but you can send it. Whereas with a screenplay, they will not take it. And if they do take it, you're going to have to sign all kinds of waivers and so forth. With with a copywritten anything, book, comic book, you don't have to worry. And more importantly, they don't have to worry about it. They don't have to worry about being sued. It is something that's already out there. So it does make life easier. And it doesn't mean you can make a comic in your basement, so to speak, and then say, "Oh, look, it exists, therefore, you don't have to worry." It does have to be sold in order for, again, whether it's online or in a store, there has to be some kind of commerce in order for it to be something safe for the producers to read and to look at.
Okay, Jen, you mentioned something about giving consultations. Do you guide people through this process?
Yeah, recently I had a book that was based on a rock band and was turned into a sort of horror book, vampires, zombies, and so forth. So I advised them on everything from what kind of budget to expect to how to find the art team. A comic book, much like a film, is not done by one or two people. You need an artist, you need an editor, which is a lot more important than most people think. You need a good editor, somebody who can guide the entire process. So you need artist, editor, writer, of course. It starts with the writer. You need an inker. You can do digitally inking, but you still need someone who can do that. You need a letterer. If you're going to be doing your book in color, which I advise doing whenever possible, if budget allows. So you need someone to do coloring, and then you need people to do the pre-press and production work of actually putting the book together, doing your logos and your titles, and just all of the credit pages, things like that. So you need to put a team together.
And I would like to add something to that. And Carol, I don't have to tell you this, but film investors are an incredibly persnickety and They're very about mitigation of risk, and they fear everything. And
Yes,
the one surefire way to get an investor fired up to put money into your project is to get them inspired. And you can have the best pitch deck and you can have a really solid script, but those things are difficult for individuals to digest, especially if they're not filmmakers in the creative space. But an investor can pick up a comic book and look at the visuals and visualize the world that the story is in, see the characters, see the way that the characters would look on camera, see the situations, and gain inspiration for that project through the comic.
absolutely. That makes so much sense because this is a visual world, and this is a great visual medium. So yes, from a comic book, you would get the essence really fast and the energy of the characters, but through a good artist, exactly as you're saying.
When I was
So,
at CrossGen Entertainment, we had a comic book publisher. In the third year, when Disney bought the company, we had 17 titles out, and we had an overhead deal with a producer named Michael Uslan, who you know obviously as the executive producer of the Batman franchise with Warner's. And through our overhead deal, he would arrange meetings for us with filmmakers, and so we would take the comics before they were published and print up mock-ups, and we would go to meetings in LA with luminaries. And over the course of a year, we made deals with Robert Zemeckis, Wes Craven,
wow.
Larry Kasanoff. We had screenwriters like Bob Gale writing scripts for us, Chuck Russell, Frank Darabont, all from the energy that they got from the comics. So it's not just about, hey, the investors will be inspired by this. We got incredible production talent on board because they loved what they saw on the page.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you had asked earlier, which is, what type of book should a producer think of doing? It really depends on what they want to do with it. If you just want to whet the appetite of people, it's a little bit different. You don't have to deal with publishers, and you don't have to deal with getting it, out in comic book stores and so forth. If you're strictly using it as a tool to get people to read your screenplay. People don't like reading screenplays as much as they enjoy reading comic books. It's
Oh,
just
much.
that simple. Yeah. So hand them a comic and they will read it that night. Hand them a
Yes,
script. You don't know.
could be weeks. And this is the fear that they won't read it. They'll have someone else read it who is the no man, we call them.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
and there's a long, long history of comics in film. And as a consequence of that, a lot of today's filmmakers grew up on the medium. Uslan did a meeting with Sam Raimi during the heydays when he was directing the Spider-Man films. And the pitch was a Shadow, a new movie reboot of the pulp character, the Shadow. And Michael didn't have a script. But in the 1960s, Michael wrote for DC Comics, and he wrote an 8-issue series based on the Shadow. So he brought the comics with him to the meeting, and he
Yeah.
was walking Sam through the story, and he was trying to get Sam to open up the comics, and Sam wouldn't do it. And finally, Michael said, "Will you just please open the comics?" And Sam said, "Do you think that I don't know what these comics were?" Sam reaches into his bag, pulls out all 8 of the issues, and they were signed by Michael. Because when Sam was a kid, he went to a comic book convention, met Michael, and Michael signed the comic books for him.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you have a generation of film producers and directors who literally grew up in the medium. And not to go full meta on this, in the 1930s and 40s, the premier studios in comics were Simon and Kirby, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, who worked primarily with Marvel and Timely Comics, and the Eisner Iger Studios. Eisner Iger Studios produced comics like The Spirit and Plastic Man, and they did the other half of the comics that were being published. Well, Jerry Iger, who was one partner, is the great grand uncle of Bob Iger, the current chairman of Disney. And Will Eisner, for whom the Oscars in the comics industry are named the Eisners, is the great granduncle of Michael Eisner, the former chairman of Disney. When Iger bought Marvel, he made the statement that he felt it was almost like a birthright that Disney needed to be a part of that because of the generational connection he had to those comics.
Exactly. How interesting. Well, now let's talk about budgeting for both of you. Budgeting for comics. So, how does the cost of producing a comic compare to making an indie film? And what should producers know about budgeting?
So when you put together a budget, and I've put together a lot of budgets
Yes.
for everything from films to, to TV to comic books, a lot is dependent on uh, who you are going to and not going to pay. So as a writer, if this is your baby and you're spearheading it, maybe you don't pay yourself. So that line can go to zero. If, you're partnering with an artist who's a buddy, maybe that's also somebody who is going to co-own and so forth. I believe in paying everybody, at least paying them something, even if it's somebody that's owning a portion of it. But if you do pay everybody, it's all work for hire and you still own your IP. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. So unless you want to team with somebody and make them a partner, um, you will have to pay everybody. I generally tell people to figure, and this is a little rough, but to figure a minimum or about $25,000 per 22 to 24 page book. And that is not including printing. That is just to get the book made. So if you're going to do a graphic novel and it's 4 issues long, it's going to be somewhere around 100 to 150,000, depending. But if you're looking at an indie film, it's a fraction of what you would spend, on putting a film together. You can also do it in less pages. Every page is a page rate for your entire team. So it really starts with the script and how many pages you're going to do. But 25,000 for a 24-page book is what I usually tell people as an estimate. And again, that's not including printing. And printing varies depending on whether you're doing a color book versus a black and white book and the number of issues you're going to print. So copies, I mean, you're going to print. There's some local as in here in the United States, printers that specialize in doing small runs. For the first time ever, I printed a book that my partner, William O'Neill, created. It's called Vexed, A Dick from Outer Space. And we did it strictly for the purpose of having it as a leave behind and pitching it. And we just did it in black and white. We decided not to go color to save money on it and went to a printer that could print only 250 copies of it. I've never done that. I've never printed less than 15,000 at a time and upwards from there. But you can print low. You can also, if you really want to save money on printing, you could go PDF and email. But there's nothing like handing it to somebody, handing them a comic book and letting them feel and touch those pages. It's just not the same as a PDF. So even if you're just going to print a small amount, I always recommend printing some.
And here's
Yeah.
a little trick. If
Yes.
you're an indie filmmaker and you are in the process of pitching for investment, getting your capital funding, if your film is 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million for your full capital raise, you can build the cost of the comic book into your marketing budget because it is a marketing tool. And if you build that into your film funding, now your comic book becomes revenue neutral. You don't have to make money on the comic. You don't have to sell it in order to create it and produce it. And then if you do wind up doing a print run and getting into the marketplace, that's all gravy. But the main reason for the comic book is to be able to attract talent, and get the IP out into the marketplace so people understand that it exists. So you can build the cost of the creation of the comic book and the first print run into your film budget so that you don't have to raise that money separately. And as a marketing line item, if it generates revenue, great. If you lose money on it, that's fine too, because the purpose of it is to get it in the marketplace and also to generate the press. The media
Yes.
landscape in comics today is vastly different than it was even 10 years ago, because comic books used to be this niche thing that in the comic book nerds, and they had the comic book websites. Well, now Daily Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Deadline.com, Forbes, New York Times, all of the major trades, all of the major mainstream media, all have reporters whose beats are the comic book industry. So when a new comic book comes out from any publisher, you can read about it not just on the comic book websites, but you can read about it on Reuters. So
Oh,
the press bump you get for your film, because if you're launching a film and you want that opening weekend, you have to have a high level of awareness. Take advantage of that new phalanx, that new army of media who love covering comic books.
that's marvelous. What a
Yeah.
great idea, Tony.
Yeah. And I published a book called John Carpenter's Snake Plissken Chronicles, and it was in partnership with John Carpenter, Debra Hill, the late Debra Hill, who was amazing, and Kurt Russell. And
And
it
CrossGen.
and at yes, at CrossGen and Hurricane Entertainment. And when we published the book, initially it was the idea of our agent at the time. He had an idea of taking the property Escape from New York, which really had nothing since the film came out. There was no games, no comics, no IP, I mean merchandise. There was nothing. And they came up with this master plan, but it all started with doing the comic book. And we got unbelievable press, including the front page, excuse me, the front page of the I think it was the Hollywood Reporter, with our
It
art.
was it
Actually,
was HR. Yeah.
yeah, it was, yeah. And not every book that comes out, of course, is going to get that kind of coverage. However, just like putting together a film, if you have the right people connected, if you maybe have talent beforehand, and this is nothing I've necessarily done, but if you have a new property and you have an actor attached, maybe when you make your comic, your artist draws that character as the actor. If
As the
they do,
actor,
yeah. So
yes.
let's say you had Kurt Russell
Yes.
attached, brand new film. He's already said, you know what, I love this, I'm going to do it. So when your artist draws, your artist is not just drawing that character, it's drawing Kurt Russell as that character. It helps to get more press on it if you have, of course, a name attached as anything else. Not that you have to. It's just, it's that little thing that helps it get a little more traction.
Oh, I bet it does.
There's
This
a
is a
great chicken or
wonderful
the
idea.
egg story revolving around the character of Nick Fury, the Samuel L. Jackson character in the Marvel films, because there was a point in Marvel where they created a separate universe of characters where they reimagined all their original IP. And the artist for that series, Brian Hitch, had an idea, and he called up his editor and he said, "Look, I want to reimagine Nick Fury not as an old white guy, but as basically as Samuel L. Jackson. I want to use his face on this character. Is there a way we can arrange it?" And agents were called and so forth. But Sam Jackson is an incredible comic book fan. He gets his comics from Ryan Leibowitz's Golden Apple Comics in LA. They have a secret back door where all the movie stars come in. Keanu Reeves goes there. Robin Williams used to go there. And Sam heard about it. He said, "Hell yeah, I'd love to do that." So they created the comic book version of Nick Fury years before the Marvel Cinematic Universe even existed. So when the time came to cast Nick Fury in the Iron Man and Avengers movies, it was a no-brainer. They just went with Sam Jackson because the character already looks like him.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, this is a whole new world. Because, like you're saying, 100 to 150,000 as part of your pre-production money to make this comic and raise the money, that's nothing.
Yeah.
Exactly. If
And
you're
this,
just doing a comic, it's a hard push up the hill. But if it's in tandem with a film project, investors are like, "Oh, that's easy money. That's a great investment."
yes, yes, this would sell faster. But one question I have, that is the 25,000 for 24 pages. Is this black and white or color? As
That's
for,
color.
oh,
That's
good,
color. Yeah.
good. Okay, fine. And it does, that stands well, because that is really all you would have to have. That instead of a deck could sell faster. I can see that happen.
And I will admit, but not admit that in my years as a publisher, there have been a few properties that I've pitched with just pages saying this is a comic book that's coming. Um, you know,
Yeah,
because once you have a reputation as actually making comics, sometimes you don't have to make the whole book in order for a producer to take a look at it. But you can't do that right out the gate. But I have done it a couple of times, not too many.
right. Okay. Well, Tony, because comics have such passionate fan communities, tell us how a filmmaker can tap into these communities to generate the buzz they need for their adaptation.
Well, once you have the adaptation and you get it into the marketplace, there is the convention circuit. Um,
Ah,
Unlike the film industry, where you basically have 4 or 5 main places that are marketplaces for film, Cannes, South by Southwest, AFM, and so forth. Comic book conventions take place in every major market all throughout the year. In fact, Jan's preparing right now for WonderCon in Anaheim, California.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so
I
when
wonder,
you go on that circuit, you do panel discussions, it gets the fans, geared up. And then they can go right to your exhibit table and buy the comic after your panel.
oh my gosh, of course. You said it's WonderCom?
WonderCon, and it's in Anaheim, not this weekend, but next weekend. And it everybody at this point has heard of the San Diego Comic-Con. It's the big one.
Yes.
San Diego Comic-Con has approximately 160,000 attendees. It's a very large convention. WonderCon is run by the same company, but has about 50 to 60,000 attendees. So the beauty of WonderCon is you can talk to people more easily because it's not as busy as San Diego. It also is not quite as expensive to go there, and you can get passes very easily. Whereas for San Diego, I think they sell out in about 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah, crazy. The really crazy thing is over 25 years ago, when I began in the industry, in the comic book industry, I would tell people I'm going to San Diego for the weekend or for the week for convention, and they say, "What is that?" And I'd say Comic-Con. They're like, "Oh, I've never heard of it." And then a couple of years later, I mentioned that I was going again, and people were like, "Oh, I saw it on the news." And and so, and then a couple of years later, it was, "Are you going to San Diego? I know it's this weekend." So it changed so much over the years. And now, of course, it's, "Can you get me a pass? I can't get in."
Yes, this is the biggest thing going now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And you have shows like Jimmy Kimmel and Conan O'Brien have done their shows live from the Comic-Con show floor.
Yeah.
wow,
It's
that's
become a massive pop culture machine.
Yeah.
yeah, that's the best advertisement they could ever have.
But I do recommend for people who are just kind of, dipping their toe in and want to learn something about the industry to start with the smaller conventions. Pretty much every city has at least a small convention in, a local hotel. And you get to meet creators. You can speak to people very easily at those shows. You can learn a lot at those shows. You can speak to writers. When it comes to the bigger shows, again, people are just too busy. Not that I'm saying don't go to Comic-Con if you can get a pass, you definitely should. It's something everybody needs to experience at least once. But it's to do business there, it's more difficult because of the number of people that are there.
Yeah. When I was at CrossGen, we would spend we had a 40 by 40 booth at a Comic-Con in San Diego, and we would set up meetings during the week, and I'd have press planted the week before Comic-Con in the LA Times and the Hollywood trades. And then I'd have to spend a week after Comic-Con to do all the follow-up meetings, because you really can't do a deal at Comic-Con. There's just way too much going on and way too much to see. So if you're going to go to Comic-Con as a means by which to promote a film or promote a comic that you want to turn into a film, plan to spend an extra week out there to do your follow-up meetings on the ground, so that you can actually leave California with a deal in your hands.
Oh, that's good advice. Thank you. Well, this is the question now, is selling to publishers or self-publishing. So should filmmakers pitch their comics to publishers like Dark Horse or IDW, or do you recommend self-publishing?
It's a very good question, and not an easy one to answer. You can get your book published. There's a lot of competition right now to get in with established publishers. Image Comics is an amazing place to publish because you own everything. They do not take a piece of your IP at all. And because of that, as the notoriety of the industry and people knowing about the industry has grown, so has the stack that Eric Stevenson has to read. So it could be months and months and months before they even look at whatever you send in. And there is on their website, that's Image Comics, there are guidelines of what exactly they're looking for to pitch a book. But if you want to do something in your own timeline, where you're in control of when the book gets made and when it's ready to show to the public, I would recommend doing it on your own if you have the finances to do it. And again, you need to ask yourself, do I want to sell it online? Do I want to try to get it into comic book stores? Where exactly do I want to sell it? More and more of the comic book creators, people who are writers and artists and so forth, they're just taking into their own hands, and they're going to Kickstarter or to some of the other companies that help raise funds, mainly Kickstarter, and they are doing campaigns, and some of them have a fan base, some don't. If you could connect yourself with artists who already have a following, you can more easily get the word out based on the fan base of those artists. So that is something that I recommend. If you can afford to get artists with a fan base, go for that. It can help for everything. Kickstarter is not for everybody, but it is a way to both market your property and raise money to publish it. So it kind of serves as a little bit of both. However, it's not, it's a gamble. It's a gamble. So it doesn't mean you're 100% going to raise the money to do it. And again, if you're dealing with established artists and so forth, you have a better chance. You can also do your book online. One of the best ways I've seen people do it is there are people who have a following online, and they will let like one page a week they'll upload for people to read. And by the time they get to somewhere around page 3 or 4, people are like, I need more. I don't want to wait for this whole book to, come free. So around that time, you make it available for purchase. And
Oh, I see.
yeah, and I think that is one of the most brilliant ways of doing kind of a hybrid of publishing it on your own, but also just putting it out there for free to people. I don't recommend doing the whole book for free. Definitely dangle the end so that people have to buy it if they want the full story. But it is a good way to do it. I'm not going to lie, it is difficult right now to get publishers to publish your book. It's not impossible, but it is difficult. But if you have, again, some sort of a hook, like, actors or a director attached or something, there's more of a chance of you going to the top of the pile as opposed to, the bottom of the pile. And we're talking about writers who've never written for the comic book industry before, so they're just going cold, to publishers. But definitely, if you can do just 10 pages, if you do want to go the publishing route and get a publisher, do about 10 pages, fully drawn, inked, preferably colored, but it doesn't have to be, and professionally lettered. That's like my biggest advice. If you go in and it's not professionally lettered, nobody's going to look at it. They're going to just look at you as an amateur. And so there are letterers out there that you can hire, that are available. Actually, Dave Lamphere, who's one of the top letterers in the industry, is our partner in Victory Comics. And you can go around with 10 pages to publishers and say, this is what my book is going to look like. Here is a synopsis of what it's about. And if they're interested and they like it enough, they'll take it on. You don't have to have a finished book at first if you're going to go to publishers. But again, it's a long shot. There's fewer and fewer publishers out there, and there's more and more people trying to make comics. So if you do it on your own, I think right now is a little bit better than going to a publisher.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
Tony.
we'd like to know how people can reach the two of you to learn more about how to turn a script into a comic book. So tell us how we can find you.
Yeah, so I guess my email is the easiest way. I'm also I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, but my email address is JANUON26 @gmail.com. So it's just JANUON26. I'm also known in the industry as Hurricane Jan. So if you Google Hurricane Jan, you may find me. And on Facebook, it's under Jan Utstein. And my last name is spelled U, T as in Tom, S as in Sam, T as in Tom again, EIN as in Nancy.
Okay, marvelous. Now, in closing, let's talk about the future of cross-media storytelling. Because with the rise of transmedia storytelling, what do you think the future looks like for filmmakers who want to expand their stories into comics, games, and other media?
I really believe that you should put together a deck of some kind that has information on what your vision is for all of those cross media. Now, not every screenplay is appropriate to do a video game, and not every screenplay, is appropriate for all platforms. But if you're doing science fiction or fantasy, that's a no-brainer. Um, if you just sort of maybe do a one sheet on for what the film, a film's poster would look like. I've done that many times where I will do a mock-up of what of what the film poster would be. But Tony, this is a great question for you. He's done a number of decks for independent filmmakers, and in those decks you can definitely put, here's information on what the game would look like, and get an artist to do some artwork. Artwork just speaks 1,000 words.
Yeah.
And
It
makes it
really
look more
does.
real. Yeah, it makes it look
But
like it's real already, even though it hasn't been done.
but also have a vision for how all the pieces fit together. Because if you have intellectual property that's good for a movie, it's probably good for a comic book. It's probably good for a video game. It's probably good for a variety of interpretations. And
Yeah,
you can take that original story that you have for your screenplay and expand it by having different elements of the story told through the different elements of IP proliferation. A great example is what Warner's has done with a property that they call Injustice, which is basically a different vision of the Justice League of America, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, in which Superman becomes a totalitarian dictator of Earth, and the heroes split into two camps. One that values freedom, the other that values order. And they originated that as a video game. And then after the video game came out, they did a comic book on it. After the comic book came out, they did an animated film based on it that went straight to DVD and to streaming. So, and it's a story that's completely different from any other interpretation. If you have a comic book story or a film story, you can use different elements. For instance, if you have a film, you don't have to translate your screenplay into a comic book. You could do a comic book that's a prequel to your film. So you set up the origins of all of your characters so that when people go to see the film, A, they get a new story, but B, they have a sense of who these people are, who these characters are before they walk into the theater.
Yes, and that's what brings us in on those 4 or 5 series, 4 or 5 year series. We love the characters, so that's why we're there. So yes, meeting your character ahead of time makes a lot of sense. If you like that character, you're going to love the film, and you would want to donate or invest or help. That's very important. Well, thank you both. We would really love to do this again in a year. Let's see where the industry goes and how much comics take over.
Oh, absolutely. And before we go, let me add my my contact info as well.
Oh, yes, please.
I'm simply tonypanaccio@gmail.com. Tony, common spelling, Panaccio, P as in Peter, A and as in Nancy, C as in Charlie, C as in Charlie, I-O. It's all one word, no dots or dashes, @gmail.com.
And that will be on the site with the link for the program. We'll have both of your emails there.
Excellent.
So we can find you. Thank you very much, Claire, for helping.
Oh, yes, as always. This was very enlightening. I learned more than I ever thought I could, and I'm sure there's a lot more to gain in your wisdom when we have you back on in about a year.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you so much, Tony. Very kind of you. I know you're brilliant at marketing. And Jan, you know your stuff because you do accounting as well as the producing.
Yeah.
So,
And if I could add, if anybody is going to be at WonderCon next weekend, look for the booth under our booth. It's under William O'Neill, Gentleman Nerd. And that's my partner. Because we're not actively publishing right now, we sell his artwork. But I will be there. It's a nice corner booth in at WonderCon. Again, it's William O'Neill, Gentleman Nerd.
okay, we'll look for that. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Now, in its second edition, Carol Dean's popular book, The Art of Film Funding, has 12 new chapters to cover all areas of film financing and how to avoid expensive pitfalls. Learn how to start with an idea and end with a trailer, how to make an ask for money, create your story structure and your trailer, legal advice, fair use, successful crowdfunding, how to ask for music rights, and what insurance you can't shoot without. Available on Amazon under Carol Dean and at FromTheHeartProductions.com. I want to remind our listeners that David Raiklin is a brilliant and talented award-winning musician who scores films and can compose music for a trio or for a full orchestra. David is a very good friend to the independent filmmaker and comes highly recommended by From the Heart Productions. If you need music to help tell your story, please contact him at davidraiklin.com. That's David, RAIKLEN.com. And Carol and I want to thank you for tuning in to The Art of Film Funding. Please visit our website at FromTheHeartProductions.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Good luck with your films, everyone.